the country he had desolated and profaned. Thanks to Mr. Red Adair of Texas, they were put out in 3 months. But everyone would prefer to sneer at that, wouldn't they, and say, oh, well, that's just profits for Halliburton and Bush's cronies. What must not be, and will not be by me at any rate, pardoned in this debate is any flippancy of that kind, any paranoid conspiracy theory garbage of the other kind I mentioned earlier, or any view that we have any right to regard this struggle as if it was a matter of indifference to us and we are able and willing to take bets on the outcome as affectless neutrals. Don't let that be said of any of you here tonight. Thanks.
Seven minutes, Danner.
We certainly aren't spectators. There's no question about that. I think Christopher's idea or appeal to the Greens, appeal to women's movements, appeal to NGOs here to help the Iraqis is very moving. Some of those people I saw on the way out of Baghdad. I flew out with the Red Cross, who were leaving. The United Nations left. The NGOs are gone from Iraq. They've left. They've been attacked. They've been killed. The two biggest car bombs were the Red Cross and the United Nations. All of the United Nations is gone. It's an enormous fort now, this hotel that was attacked, surrounded by sandbags, by layers of concrete barriers. It's an enormous wasteland that struck me as, I don't know, some kind of postmodern symbol for what we have become, that this is the United Nations in Iraq. So if you want to go help, you can't. Because the people who are setting these suicide bombs have a very clear strategy. They want to isolate the United States. They want to keep any allies from helping the United States. Witness the bombing of the Turkish embassy, which indeed made the decision by the Turkish government to send troops into a fiasco. That decision has now effectively been withdrawn. It's true we're not spectators. And since we are involved very directly, I'd appeal again for a clear-eyed vision of what's going on. Christopher said a moment ago that we have absolute military superiority in Iraq. This recalls a comment made over the weekend by General Ricardo Sanchez, who's the commander there, that these attacks that we've seen in recent days are strategically and operationally insignificant. That's not the case. No, the American army is not about to be brought to its knees in Iraq. But the American army is not able to fight effectively against what's happening there, against its foe there. It is simply going out on patrols, I went on a number of them, and waiting to be attacked. There's a paucity of intelligence about who these people are, where they are, what the order of battle is, what they're doing. And you know, it's very well, I think, for Christopher to say that we're not spectators. Because it's important to realize this isn't an argument about the war in Iraq. It's an argument about what might have been done otherwise and what the costs of this war are going to be. Not just financial costs, which are going to be enormous, not just cost in blood, which is going to be very high before we get out of there, but cost in, and this is where I agree with him, that Al-Qaeda and the war in Iraq can't be separated, cost in our own, what economists call opportunity costs, in what could have been done if this unnecessary war wasn't fought. The intelligence assets, the military assets, the moving of essentially a half of the United States military into an occupation that's getting more and more messy. And finally, the creation in Iraq of what is coming to look like a failed state, a place where terrorists can enter the border at their will, where they can carry out spectacular operations that are essentially recruiting tools. These things are intended to build a movement. And by giving them a ground on which to do it, and a clear front on which to face American troops and kill them at will, the Bush administration has helped in that recruiting tool. I certainly don't want to stand here and say to you that the war in Iraq is lost. What I do want to do is point out that though the Bush administration has replied to each of these series of attacks by stating, usually in the words of the president, that we are firm in Iraq, we are determined not to leave, that in fact they have responded to each attack on the policy side by accelerating the movement to handing over security duties to Iraqis who are barely trained. They're handing them over to civil defense patrols that have 2 weeks of training. Now, does that matter? I'm not going to stand here and say we should get out of Iraq. I don't think we can get out of Iraq. But I also don't see the solution that will make the United States and everybody in this room and everyone we know and cherish more secure, safer. As time goes on there, as the attacks increase, the United States becomes less safe. The goal in Iraq is not simply to get out, but to leave a government, a situation that is stable, that doesn't threaten the country. As time goes on, it becomes more apparent that the situation before the war in Iraq was much less threatening to the United States than advocates of the war claimed, and that the situation in Iraq now is much more threatening to Americans than advocates of the war are willing to admit. And that is the simple situation we see in front of us. Yes, we have absolute military superiority. Let's see, does that phrase evoke any historical memories? I have a brother-in-law who was a Marine in Vietnam. No, Iraq is not yet Vietnam. Who was very impressed by a very conservative man, who was very impressed by that war. He always says to me, political correctness aside, that you have to remember that the guy with the feather can beat you. That is, the guerrillas on the ground can win. And if the United States withdraws from Iraq in a situation where things are getting worse, where the government is less stable, where you have neighboring countries asserting their interests, the Turks, the Iranians, increasing terrorism, a situation where Al-Qaeda benefits from having training bases, attacking American troops. All of this is happening right in front of us. If that happens, and it is happening, then this war will have made us much less safe. And you have to put that on one side of the scale and put the evidence that we were threatened before on the other. And I would argue to you that that evidence, that we were threatened before, is becoming slimmer by the moment.
Time.